In the previous episode, we mentioned that Jesus said that unless we understand the parable of the seed and the sower, we won't understand anything he did or said. There's something else that I believe is very crucial to the believer, and it's what John 15 calls abiding in Christ. Now, abiding is a difficult word to understand, but the best way I can understand it is to think of it like this: that abiding in Christ is to be in living communion with Christ. Now let's go beyond the theological here, because this is something to be experienced. This is a kingdom reality. So, being in living communion with Christ is more than just knowing him. This is more than just being born again. This is more than going to church. This is being in living communion with God himself. This is a progression from knowing him. And Jesus said, "I'm the vine, you are the branches. Unless you abide in me, you cannot bring forth fruit. Without me, you can do nothing." So he is the vine, and the life flows from the vine into the branch as the branch abides or is in living communion with the vine. So we're born as a branch, we live as a branch, we die as a branch. All we ever are is a branch. And the branch has no life in itself. The only way a branch can get life is to abide or to be in living communion with the vine. And as we're in living communion with the vine life flows into us. We have no life in ourselves. Have you noticed that? The only life we have is the life that's in us from Christ himself. Now, when I just said to you that the life can produce no life of itself, there's something very important we must understand here. Jesus said that when a branch goes on its own, if it doesn't produce anything, he lifts it up. Some translations say there that he cuts it off. But what it really means is he lifts up the branch. Now what's Jesus getting at there? I think this is quite important. I asked my brother once, who used to work in a vineyard, and I asked him about this. I said, "What do you do with branches that go off on their own?" And he said, "We lift them up and we tie them back to the vine." And I said, "Why do you do that?" And quick as a flash, my brother said, "Because the branch that is on the ground, it begins to take root into the soil, and it tries to get its life from the soil rather than the vine." Isn't that interesting? So a branch tries to get life from other things other than the vine. And the vine dresser, who my brother was at the time, or the husbandman, I think some translations say, has to lift up that branch to stop it getting its life source from something other than the vine. And that's what happens to us. That sometimes we try to get our life from something other than the vine. And Jesus has to lift us up so that we don't take root in those things. Sometimes that's correction. Sometimes it's discipline. Sometimes it's saying things to us by his Spirit that are a bit uncomfortable. Sometimes it's letting go of things we don't want to. What's the point? The point is that we maintain living communion with the vine. That's why he lifts up those branches. So we're in living communion with the vine. And as we abide in Christ, the life of the vine flows through to us. Remember, let's not be theological about this. I'm trying very hard not to just quote chapter and verse, because this is something that is a living reality. This is something to be experienced in our everyday life. I was a part-time jail chaplain once for 3 years, and bar one prisoner out of the hundreds of prisoners I saw, everyone would say, "Can you come back and see me?" Why? Because all I did was lift up Jesus in their situation, in their cell. I just talk about Jesus. I talk about Jesus in me. And for those moments, even though they weren't believers, something happened to them. Why? Because I was just lifting up Jesus. And that's what being in living communion with the vine does. It transcends you above your circumstance. It lifts you to a different spiritual plane. Now, abiding in Christ is something we must learn to be skilled at. We've got to say to things, if our branch is lying on the ground and it is starting to get life from the soil, from the world or something other than the vine, and that can be even religious activities, we need to say no. I am going to stay focused on my living communion in the vine. Sometimes you have to be hard on yourself. It's a skill. So we need to be skilled at abiding in the vine.